We're now going to talk about the second half of the chapter. The first half of the chapter was, what do I do when people don't pay me? In reality, you want them to pay you because you want them to continue buying from you. So we're going to talk about notes receivable. A note receivable is a little bit different than accounts receivable. I think I said earlier that it involves interest. And so it's nothing more than a legal promise to pay. Basically, I owe you this money. I cannot pay you, but I promise to pay you over a period of time. Usually notes receivable is good only for less than a year, so it's usually in the amount of days, plus interest. Okay, so the next slide is going to show characteristics of a notes receivable. And since I don't actually test on terminology, you just need to understand what all this means. Here's an example of the note. So this is a note written by Selig Company. They're the maker. They signed it on March 16th. They promised to pay this company $2,000. So $2,000 is the face amount or the principal in 90 days from March 16th at an annual interest rate of 10%. Let me turn my little highlighter on. Sorry about that. Here we go. So 10% is annual interest rate. So here are the important things you need to know. You need to know the principal amount. You need to know the time frame of 90 days. You need to know the date signed and the interest rate. Because the two hardest parts in this part of the chapter are how much interest is owed and what date is it due on. Now, according to this, it's due on June 14th. But let me show you how to calculate the due date. So remember, we signed it on March 16th, and it's for 90 days. We're going to start with the day it was actually signed. So how many days in the month of March was 31 days? But I signed it on the 16th, so I subtract that. So that means I have 15 days left in March. 30 days are in the month of April, 31 are in May. And at this point, if I wasn't looking here, I would add up 15, 30, and 31, and I would get a total of 76 days. I need to know what day is day number 90, so I would subtract 90 days from the total of these three, 76. It would be due June 14th. Now this means that some of you are going to have to know how many days in each month, and I know that's a problem also. Use your calendar. But this is how you calculate the due date. Some of your homework is on how to do the due date. Start with the date you sign it, how many days in that month, 31 days, subtract that. So you have 15 days left for the month of March. Since April has 30 days, you're going to add that. May has 31 days. You're going to add that. Stop. Add up these three numbers at 76. Subtract 76 from the 90 days you're looking for, and that's how it's due on June 14th. This is going to be difficult for some of you, but once you get it, you'll understand it. So here's an example. Basically, I need 90 days from March 16th, and I do not include the day I signed the note. It starts counting the next day. Okay, so knowing what the due date is important. The other important part of this part of the chapter is how much interest is due. So here's my formula. It's going to be principal or face amount times interest rate times term divided by 360 days. Now the face amount or the principal is $2,000 times 10% interest. That is annual interest for the whole year, but we're only talking 90 days, which is why I multiply it 90 days divided by 360. So interest becomes $50. The maturity value is the principal or face amount plus the interest. So on June 14th, they owe me $2,050. This $50 is interest revenue to me. Now, let me explain why we calculate the division by 360 and not 365. The only people who use 365 days in the year is when the Federal Reserves lend money to your bank. So 360 is used by all banks. It's just a generic makes it easier to calculate things. So to recap, the two most important things of this part of the chapter are to know the due date and how much interest. So next we're going to look at journal entries for notes receivable. So basically the reason people sign a note is because they owe them money through accounts receivable. So your customers owe you money in accounts receivable, but they cannot pay you in 30 days for whatever reason. Sometimes they just have cash flow problems. Sometimes they're not going to wait for they're not going to get money from their customer until another 60 days. So in reality, you really want them to sign a note as compared to not pay you. So here's the journal entry. I'm going to get ready to show you the journal entry for what happens on a notes receivable. Now, remember, these are accounts receivable customers. So when the customer signs the note, they're going to actually come out of accounts receivable and go into a note receivable. So this is a 30-day note, 12% dated November 21st. So they owe them $6,000. So here's the journal entry. I'm removing it from the accounts receivable, putting it into notes receivable. The first thing you should do right now is calculate the due date and calculate the interest. I'll wait a minute until you do that. Figure out the interest, figure out the due date. As a matter of fact, pause the video while you calculate it. So this is the journal entry to start the note. Now, I'm going to show you the journal entry when the note is due and they pay. So here's the journal entry that they're going to when I collect the money. So $6,000, so it's the principal times 12% times 30 days divided by 360. So $60 is interest revenue. I'm going to credit the notes receivable to wipe that off the books, and I get $6,060 cash. By the way, if you did it right, December 21st would be the due date. $60 would be the interest. Okay? So it's very simple journal entries. The journal entry to start the note is this one, as long as it was from an accounts receivable. And the journal entry to collect the cash is this one. Now there is another scenario. What happens if they don't pay you? Because things happen in real life. So when a customer does not pay you the note on December 21st, it's called a dishonored note. And by the way, the notes receivable is no longer valid after December 21st. So when they don't pay you, it's called a dishonored note. And here's what happens. I'm going to show you the journal entry on how to take it out of notes receivable and put it back into accounts receivable with interest. So here's the journal entry for that same note if they didn't pay me. So I'm going to take the $6,000, credit to receivable, credit the revenue because I still earned the $60, I just did not get it. And I'm going to move the total back into accounts receivable. So they still owe me $6,060. I just did not get the money. I still earn the rent. So to recap this, you sign the note, they either pay you or they don't. If they pay you, I showed you the journal entry, which is this right here. This is when they pay me. If they don't pay me, this is called a dishonored note. Just to recap. The next thing we're going to address on this is what happens if I write a note in 1 year and it's not due until the next year. For example, if I wrote a note in November and the due date wasn't until March of the next year. So we have to make adjusting entries. Just remember we did that in chapter 3. So we need to accrue the interest till December 31st and document the interest earned but yet not received. So I'm going to show you the next slide. The first thing you should always do is calculate the due date, calculate the interest. So here we have a $4,000 90-day 12% note dated December 1st. So go ahead, take time. I want you to calculate the interest and the due date before I talk about the journal entries. Pause your computer while you're doing that. Well, hopefully you found that March 1st is the due date and that the interest is $120. So here is the journal entry. Hold on, guys. Here's the journal entry to start the note on December 1st. So what I'm going to do is at the end of December, I need to know how much interest I've earned but yet not received. So I'm going to do my calculation down here. 4,000 times 12% times 30 days divided by 360. Because there are 30 days from December 1st to December 31st, it's 30 days. So I want to make sure I know how much interest for that year. So this is interest for this particular year. So I'm going to debit the receivable and credit the revenue. So I've actually earned money this year, but I'm not going to receive it until March. Here's the journal entry for when I receive it. On March 1st, and that should have been your due date, I'm going to collect $4,120. Of the $4,000, I'm going to credit notes receivable. The interest receivable is now received. I got the money, so I have to credit that. And the interest revenue for this year is $80. So that's basically how to do the journal entries for notes receivable. They're very simple. You have a journal entry to create the note. They either pay you or they don't. That's another journal entry. And if your note goes from one period into the next accounting period, you need to calculate the interest for that period and do an adjusting entry.